Hey, everybody, and welcome to the secret history living in all of our aquariums. Today, we've got a very special guest, Mr. Dan Connor, and he is a Florida fish farmer, advocate of the hobby, podcaster. He juggles. I mean, he can balance a ball on his nose. He's a very talented individual. But he is, graciously here with us today to kind of talk about the inside scoop that whatever you guys want to know about the aquarium industry and import export slash farm industry and what that looks like for them, both uh, working with wholesalers, working with the public, what's kind of going on, how it used to be a very big industry. It still is a big industry, but it used to be a huge industry of little family farms in the 60s and so forth, and now has kind of become a lot more conglomerated by corporations and bigger wholesalers and things, for the most part, I would say. But we'll let Dan talk about the details of all that. But that's the general trajectory, and there's good things about that, there's bad things about that, but we kind of want to, we all know a lot of the good things, I feel like, and so we can point those out if they're easy to see and they pop up. But obviously, let's find out some of the dark things too, or some of the things we can improve. That's always on my mind, like what media, or whatever you want to call this, entertainment, information, infotainment, that's kind of our job as media or journalism, whatever you want to call it, amateur journalists, I'll call myself. So yeah, before we get rolling, I just wanted to also say that down below in the description, there should be links to both his podcast, if you want to listen to the episodes of that, and then also to the website with his company. So they've got, it's Consolidated Fish Farms, correct?
Yep, that's it.
All right. And so they've got, right now they've got on the main page that I linked to, they've got a bunch of Tanganyikan fish kind of being featured, which is cool. And so yeah, he's also got an episode touching on that with who is it, Pam Chin, is that who it was? Or,
yep, Pam Chin.
Right,
yeah, we did one on Tanganyikans, which was pretty cool. That was actually very eye-opening. I didn't know that part of it, and that was fun.
Right on. Okay, so all right, let me get some a little bit of self advertising, shameless plugging going on here real quick. First of all, thank you everyone for being here, and mods, thank you for helping out, doing what you do, tossing up relevant links and information when needed in the chat. And we'll be taking questions at the end of when we're kind of done doing our little dialogue sort of deal. And then after this, if you're interested, through midnight tonight, I think it's Pacific time, I would hope anyways, there's a sale going on all my merch, and there's new merch. So the link to my Teespring store, or if you just want to Google Secret History Teespring, you'll find it too. But there's a link in the description below to membership, to the channel, as well as to the merch, and then also to relevant products and stuff that I like that are usually linked below, and Aquatic Arts, who I also work with, speaking of industry folks. So yeah, there's new, a lot of you guys wanted to see Secret History Living in Your Aquarium, the actual channel name on my stuff. Before, I had said that I didn't like branding any of my stuff, but so many people have asked for that to be written on a mug or the logo. So it's on pint glasses, it's on mugs, it's on towels and stuff that are in there now. So have at it, guys. There's a sale of 15% off, and it's also pretty low priced above the I have a price they set, then I can add whatever I want on top of that. So I try to go below the recommended one, and most months I do donate that to a related conservation charity cause. So it goes to a good home, and it also promotes the channel. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Monster Fish Gal. Thank you, Laurie, for posting that. All right, without further ado and more yakking on my end, that was plenty. Let's get to Dan Connor, who's volunteered his time and experience with us. So welcome, Dan. Welcome.
Hey man, I appreciate it. This is fun. So I'm more than happy to do stuff like this. This is what I like doing this, talking about fish, talking shop. It's a good time.
Yeah. All right. So let's start at the beginning. How do you know fish? What got you into fish? What's the story?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in the industry. So when I was a kid, we were just mostly angelfish farmers. So we had a 10-acre piece of property, and back then we would breed the angels inside. We had a hatchery. We kept all our brood stock. We'd breed them in there, and then we'd eventually put them out in the ponds. And we do in the pond production, we do anywhere between. I asked my dad for clarification, make sure I was right. Between 500,000 and 1 million angels, roughly a year, was our production level.
Wow.
Pretty significant amount. There it goes. I couldn't hear myself. There it goes. But a pretty good amount. And then we did a few other species on top of that, and we did African cichlids, like some of the basic mbunas. We did checkerboard barbs, discus for a while. And then I just kind of grew in it from just being a farmer. Probably this is going to be, I think, 95, 96, somewhere in that. I think that range. Maybe 98. A bunch of farmers decided they wanted to become a distributor. Instead of selling to distributors like the bigger ones out there, they were going to make their own. And the goal was to make more money, right? Farmers make the least amount in the entire supply chain across any agriculture product or anything made, essentially, right?
Sure.
The goal was to do that. So they combined. It was 13 farmers or so when they started it. And then over the last, I guess, 10 years after that company started was in all the big fluctuations here in the real estate market.
Oh, yeah.
Impacted the buying and selling of all the farms. So we had the big boom, and a lot of the farmers that were in our thing were in those areas where the development happened. So they were like, this is my retirement. I'm out. So they left the company and got out. And then the bottom came, and everyone's like, I just want to go do something else. So they left, and it ended up just being my dad and another partner. And my dad's like, I think I'm going to get out too. I think I'm going to go into real estate. He already had his real estate license. He was getting out, actually. And
wow.
He told his partner, he's like, hey, because they had other farms together outside of the distributor. They had 2 other farms we ran too. And he said, it's like, hey, I think I'm going to get out. We went out, celebrated for dinner that night. Came in that morning and said, hey, I'll bring you the deed to the property. They were just going to swap the property or whatever, to make the money work for the share of the company.
Yeah.
And we got there that morning, and he left everything for him and said, hey, I took your advice. I left everything for my dad could get it. So my family's had it for the last 15 years. And it's just been us.
Wow. So it went from 13 farms down to just you guys, huh?
Just us over the years. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and it's the whole industry's kind of trajectory has been that direction. So there used to be, maybe 300 farms in Florida. Now there's probably 30 that are really producing. I mean, there's a lot more than 30, but they're producing a lot of fish.
Yeah, I was reading before the show that the peak in 1969, I think it said, was there were 670 licenses issued for freshwater fish farming, ornamental, and now it's like less than 120, like that have official licensing with the state, anyways. So
yep.
Well, I mean, and like you said, that figure, the newer figure, only it included crayfish for food or other things too. So it's even smaller than, like you said, like the 30 or so big farm. So okay, let me stop you too. In why Florida? I mean, it seems obvious to maybe a lot of fish people, but let's just go over that economically really quick, like.
You're right. Yeah, sure. The main reason is climate, right? So down here, if you've ever seen Florida, we have an Interstate 4, which basically cuts through the middle of our state. We basically identify I-4 as what we call the freeze line. Anything below I-4 is typically good farming land for tropical fish outdoors.
Okay.
Anything above I-4, we typically don't see a ton of farms on. And that's just because the temperature year round isn't going to get low enough that's really going to kill off all of our crop typically in an outdoor environment. And we can mitigate that issue a lot by covering ponds with plastic, making them like their own internal greenhouses, running constant water to them, right? So if our well water, because everything's on a well, our well typically so far down, you're using basically like geothermal. So the well's always going to be the same temperature year round. So it's typically like 72, 73 degrees. It'll run that water constantly. It'll never drop below that. And we typically don't have much issue with many of the fish we raise in 72, 73 degree water.
So are you still then part of that? I mean, if you don't know, but in geology, it's pretty well known. There's a few big aquifers in the country, but Florida has the one that runs from basically up in Georgia all the way. It's an underground river essentially that runs like midway down and then kind of outlets into the Everglades, as I have understood it. Is that what you're tapped into, basically, that same kind of water that the Blue Springs that people have probably seen, Instagram videos of and stuff, where there's all the fish and you can swim in that crystal clear water? So that's like the same water you can raise fish in, right?
Yeah, same water. Yep.
Okay.
It's just it just comes from, depending on where you're at and your topography, it might be further down. There's different levels too. So there's shallower wells, there's deeper wells. It just depends on the specific farm's need for water and what they're trying to attempt to do. Pond culture is going to be much different than putting it in research systems, inside indoors or in green, fish greenhouse type structures and whatnot. Might be a different water demand.
Yeah. So, when we're looking at this from an economic standpoint, so we don't, in the US, there may be a few months where you need covers or to add some sort of heater or insulation or something, or move things. But for the most part, Florida is free heating of the fish and some sunshine. I mean, people may think of breeding fish, and because of the hobby, they may think of tanks inside, and there's that also. But the real way to make money is to be able to put them out in a big pond, essentially, right? With most species, the common ones.
Yeah, I think that's actually probably one of the biggest differences in the hobby that's moved forward. A lot of the farmers have moved away from huge pond cultures to really incorporating more inside green. They still do ponds. Ponds are still there because you can put so many more fish outside, but you are doing some more common. You're doing live bears and stuff like that. A lot of feeder fish, that's where they're going to be put. But anything of, prized value, maybe African cichlids, you might be doing in essentially concrete burial vaults, which are, stuff it's basically the structure you would put caskets in. That is, I think that's probably the overall number one most used fish farmer production unit, if that makes sense. And they hold roughly a little over 200 gallons of water, but they don't go bad. They last forever. We just literally acquired, I think, 70 more to put up 2 more greenhouses ourselves, which was a lot to get them moved. A lot. They're 1,500 pounds a piece. So
that's lighter than I thought they would be with their size, actually. But I mean, still, that's a task and a half. I mean, wow. So that's the other thing is, if people are interested in seeing that side of things, I have some videos. When I went down to Florida, I went to the Aquaculture Research Center. So any of my videos that are tagged Florida, I went to a few fish farms and raising facilities and ponds and things. You guys can check out and see what that looks like. And then of course, other channels have covered it well too. Aquarium Co-op went down and saw some farms. They've got some good footage with their cinematography and stuff. And then do you have a channel, Dan, that you post any video on?
Yeah, I haven't done anything in about a few weeks, but essentially it's my same name. It's under Aquarium Insider. So I have a YouTube channel where I put out a few videos. I'm actually putting my podcast on there as well. I figured the first of the year, we're going to start putting out about a couple videos a week. And they're not going to be long. They're going to be very short videos where it's very specific questions. So have people ask very specific questions of their specific need. I'll make a video about it. So like a 2 to 3 minute video.
Okay, great. So, all right, so back to the farming. Sorry about that little tangent, but back to the farming. So, I mean, like farming food, I would guess when you have a big pond, you have a temptation to have a monoculture or to have all one kind of fish. And if it gets sick, all that one kind of fish can get sick very quickly, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like what's so if historically there were ponds, maybe you have an acre and you put a couple ponds on there, and you let the fish grow out in the ponds mostly, and then you would hatch in those vaults or indoors or some other smaller container, correct? Or how does that work?
It depends on the fish, but mostly, generally speaking, we would hatch them indoors, get them to a size where they're off of live foods. We can feed them more of a production diet, and then depending on the fish, we'll move them to a pond and let them grow out from there. So African cichlids is a big one for that. We were doing that for a little bit. We do gold dust mollies in that sort of way, venustus or giraffe cichlids, things like that, and then let them just kind of grow up and just kind of have an idea of what we have in that pond over time.
Okay. All right. So, and then once you got your fish grown out, I guess we'll talk about some of the issues and like what looks different in Southeast Asia where this happens versus Florida. We'll talk about that, but let's talk about kind of just so we get an overview of what you do and what all you're encompassing in your work. So once you've got your fish, it's ready to sell. Say you've got the gold dust mollies or platies or guppies or whatever it may be. What do you do when you have 100,000 or $500,000 a year? Like, so where would you go with 50,000 that month? Is this a seasonal thing? Do you time it so they're churning out like every few months or every month or so what does all that look like?
Yeah. So we're not typically harvesting. Very few times a year are we harvesting full ponds to sell it off in a short amount of time. What we normally do is we'll put in traps essentially, and we'll trap what we call box lots. So we'll trap. So a box of gold dust mollies might be 250 fish for one box. They might want 5 boxes of this week, 20 boxes that week, 30 boxes. It doesn't matter. Whatever the quantity is, we'll trap for that. If the quantity gets too high, then we'll have to seine the whole pond and pull them out.
Okay.
But generally speaking, if we've got 50 varieties of fish, there might be 10 to 20, maybe 30 boxes on order for each kind, depending on what's available.
Okay.
From there. And then what we'll have to do with them is if they come from a pond culture, they will end up going to another kind of covered greenhouse structure with the burial vaults, and they'll have to go into those vats and purge out for a few days at least before they're packed up and sent to a wholesaler or distributor, right?
And so there's no ammonia buildup in shipping, right. Or and do you treat on a farm or most farms? I mean, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit right now. Mm-hmm. Do they treat the fish with anti-parasites? I mean, if your fish are outside in the open, birds could drop stuff in there. I mean, other critters can get in theory. So like, what does the industry norm look like for this? And then what do you think the ideal is of this,
Yeah, I think, I didn't know when we started doing the retail side, I didn't know the names of like the retail chemicals that were available for like fish health. And I didn't realize it's actually not that far off than what we normally use in industry. The concentrations might be different, but the types that are available to you are basically what we use. Okay. So I'd say industry typically is going to have a couple different options. A lot of farmers like using antiseptic type chemical for transport, and that's just to help curb the growth of bacteria or fungal issues on fish that may rise. Stuff like acroflavin, that's a very wide known product in industry. Yeah. And the other one that's very much used, not so much in transit, but used in the holding facility is we call it Quick Cure, but it's basically called ICX. Okay. Yeah. So ICX, like from Hikari, it's basically the same type of chemical. It's a combination of formalin or which is like a liquid form of formaldehyde, the gas, right? Malachite green, which has mostly been used in our industry for antifungal, maybe even mostly on like eggs a lot, but it's antifungal, to prevent antifungal growth in there. And
it's I just wanted to interject really quick that it's really fascinating to me how malachite, Victorian, and methylene blue and greens, and then yellow dye also. There's like 4 or 5 dyes that are all blue greenish colors pretty much, that happen to be antifungal also. So I just thought I'd toss that out there, that we see that in our hobby. If on the hobby end, we have access to Victorian green or malachite green. It's often in anti-parasitical. Anytime you treat your tank and it turns blue or green, it's usually one of those similar ingredients. So we're familiar with that. The first one, however, ICX, I mean, that's more specific, but that's great for, people who breed a lot of fish to maybe know that. So, all right, I'll let you continue. Sorry for interjecting there,
Oh no, you're good. I didn't know the dyes were, I mean, I kind of had an idea, but I didn't know that much. But yeah, it's malachite green. ICX is just the production name, but it's essentially malachite green, the formalin. And then obviously you said the methylene blue. That's a big one. We use a lot of methylene blue in our production for angelfish eggs.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
That's a big thing that kind of inhibit, the fungus growing on and whatnot. So that's a big thing. And then salt's probably our number one thing we use. It's bigger because anytime if you're harvesting fish out of a trap or a net, you're going to have loss of slime coat. And that's the first thing you got to replenish because that stops anything from getting, sick. And that's the first thing you're going to see that crashes is that fish can't fight off anything in those vats. So salt's a big thing. And those,
Sure.
and then when we get to the transport side of things, once they've been purged, it mostly ends up being methylene blue and salt typically is pretty much the number one thing that's getting used in transport. And that's the same thing, inhibits any sort of extra growth, adds more mucus layer in the fish. The fish that have been purged out, they're ready to go, and then they'll move to wherever they're going. It's typically a distributor, and then they'll get shipped out and gone from there.
Okay, so I just wanted to kind of map this out for people. So you guys grow the fish, say 6 months. I mean, anywhere from 4 months to a couple years or whatever, depending on the fish, grow out and all the time, and food and energy and caring for them and the land that it's on, and then that gets treated with some chemicals, sent to a distributor. That's generally someone like, say, Seagrest or a bigger distributor, right? I mean, the classic model. And then that would get sent to either a local or regional distributor, rather, or local shops that are big enough to buy lots. And now it seems like they're working a lot more on selling directly to those shops and not having the wholesaler. But to me, it seems like the more times you have to put the fish through shipping, waiting, and then chemical, quarantine or even just purging quarantine, that stress, in one hand, you could say ethically it's not the best model, but two, you could also say that well, the fish that do survive are pretty tough, but at the same time, I mean, do we want that, or do we want fish that are closer to a natural I guess what's the word, vitality or whatnot? So there's two sides of that, but that side of the industry seems to be changing, because I see a lot of farms now that are also kind of doing direct to consumer selling and stuff like that. So what's the difference for you guys, economically speaking, then, if you do it that way, where you ship them off from your farm to a wholesaler versus an individual? Like, what's the upside, what's the downside right now in today's market of that?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I think everything is kind of mimicking what we see in other industries. To me, because I was in coffee for a little bit before. I did actually got out of the industry for a little bit because I wanted to try something new and see if I could do it. But
Sure.
It mimics other people just wanting to know more about their product and really following supply chain, right?
Okay.
And I think that matters. So for us as a farm, we're looking at what people are want to know. They're not going to get that info from a distributor because they may or may not know, or their pet store may or may not know where that fish came from. I mean, they'll be like, "Oh, it came from Florida," because that's a reasonable guess as to where it came from. But as to pinning it back down in like a supply chain type manner, like it came from these guys, like that's something that I think would be helpful in industry. I think newer people that come to the hobby would want to know that sort of information. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's just me, but I would like to know when I buy things. I like to know where it comes from. Roughly, just to give me an idea. I don't have to know maybe down to the farm level, but I did when I was drinking really decent coffee. I want to know what farm it came from out of Colombia. That was me. Maybe it's not everybody, but I think that's just something to keep in mind. And I think the whole industry shifted to trying to get as close to the consumer as possible. I don't see as many larger distributors like I used to. It's moving from the big people more direct to stores. I see it I see the distributors in places where there's not a lot of access to airports.
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
the Midwest, I don't see as many direct flights in there, and I could see I think there's one or two distributors out that way where they will go ahead and they'll sell the stores because they can get there a little bit more effectively. But I think generally speaking, the industry's got to come to terms with, hey, the farm needs to sell more direct, and I don't think there's a competition there, because I think you buy from people you want to buy from, and not every
Sure,
farmer is going to have a gazillion fish. Most farmers, the big ones, might have, let's say, 50 varieties on hand at any given time. Smaller farmers might
sure,
have 20 to 30. They're not going to have the same variety to pick from as you would if you went to a larger store or a larger online store that might have, thousands of holding tanks where they've got 1,000 varieties of fish or more if they've got multiple in the same systems.
hmm,
So I think finding another way to say where the fish came from, showing people kind of the background of, like, at the very least, give some ideas of where the fish were raised and their water quality. Because if you
sure,
say I have, for me, angelfish is a good example. Well, did that come out of the Amazon? Are you comparing those water quality parameters? Or,
yeah,
angelfish are huge in Florida. They're raised in hard water. We don't have any soft water systems on our site. Everything's in just really degassed soft water.
yeah.
I'm
It
sorry,
smells.
degassed hard water, not soft water. Our water's not.
Smells like rotten eggs when you go down to those farms because of
It
the
does.
degassing, the sulfur.
It 100% will. So, yeah, I think just giving that information will give hobbyists at least a better idea of how to set up their tank. Is the main
Sure.
reason. That's the main reason I think it's a good idea, because if we keep this, and I don't think it's a guarded secret. There's no guarded secrets where the fish come from and how it's produced. I don't think there needs to be that, but having that extra a little bit info can help people keep their fish alive, and I think that produces happy customers and will eventually
Yeah.
keep people in the hobby, versus maybe the bad side of that, where they don't know, they set it up wrong because they picked up the Amazon habitat from a wild angel, and it's not the same. The fish don't make it, and then everyone's unhappy. So
Well, right. So I mean, like here in Seattle, I have a TDS of 0 to 30 out of the
yeah,
tap usually, and my pH is like 6.8 to right on the money 7 if it's 0 TDS. I mean, the only thing in my water is a little bit of chlorine, and by the time it gets to my house where I'm at, it's barely even in there, which is great in my mind because I can like do what I want with that water. It's kind of like
yeah,
RO water already. But for people like me and people in Portland, there's other places all over the country that have soft water, just different pockets. But if you have mountain ranges that have snow melt and you get lots of rain in your region, it's a good chance you're going to have softer water or acidic water even. Whereas if you have a lot of limestone caves and creeks and bedrock, then or coral like Florida, you're going to have harder water. But if I were to get, say, German blue rams from the wild, well, not German blue rams, I wouldn't get those from the wild, but let's say Bolivian rams from the wild or something like that, that like really soft acidic water, they may do better in my tanks. Whereas if they went to somebody in Florida with like 500 TDS, like a farm raised one would probably flourish, whereas the wild one may straight die. I mean, from shock. So that's kind of what you're saying too. And I just kind of want to break that down for some folks. I know a lot of folks in here definitely understand what we're saying. They're reading all those details into it, but I just wanted to kind of pull out an example in case you're not familiar with, that if you're not already really into the hobby as far as having experience with importing or buying fish from other places rather than just your local pet shop every time. And usually your local pet shop tends to kind of decide what they're going to bring in by what survives. And so if there's some really opposite thing or really extreme water, for instance, like we can find licorice gouramis at our stores around here. It's not that uncommon, which is a fish that can live down to like 3 pH, they can live in like battery acid basically, and breathe air. They're labyrinth fish. So we see fish like that, but we wouldn't see as many cichlids. Like the Midwest, they see tons of the like, you know, Tanganyikan cichlids and stuff in the Chicago area. So yet again, it's just kind of there have been historically regional ramifications to just what our water parameters are, shaping what kind of clubs and what kind of you know, keepers there are in each spot. But there are ways to overcome all of this if you're willing in any given situation. So
100%.
So when you think about fish and you think about what's the trajectory of, say, wild fish? Like if it's coming from Southeast Asia or Africa or the Amazon, how does it get to the same distributor level that when it has reached, you know, you've given your fish to the distributor, that same distributor may offer wild fish. So can you talk a little bit about, like, compared to what you just did, which was growing it maybe even down the road from the distributor in Florida, and then treating it with some chemicals for a few days, fasting it so it doesn't poop in transit and cause ammonia, and then you bring it to the distributor. What has a wild fish gone through in, you know, just to get to that distribution phase in the domestic market? Can you talk about that a little bit just to compare?
Yeah, I think it's similar. I think it depends on what country it's coming out of.
Okay.
So if you're coming out of, let's say, Central and South America, it's going to go through something similar to where they have a major exporter and they're going to be handling all of the transit for the fish, right? And they might have some collectors, right, that are going to go out and collect those fish. And they're going to have a similar sort of protocol as far as what I don't know the chemicals they use.
Right. Yeah. It could be anything.
It's different. I mean, the stuff we use is stuff that's, you know, it's regulated. We can't use certain things. We're limited in scope of those types of things. Right.
Well, let's talk about that just for a sec too, while we're on that subject. I mean, because why buy American fish? Why buy U.S. bred fish? And I mean, you could point to in Southeast Asia, they tattoo their fish, which I mean, that's a very common thing to see, or injecting dye into fish, or injecting, or even putting in the water hormones and steroids so that they grow and get really colorful for 6 months. But after that, you can see wasting disease. You can see liver damage, fatty liver disease. Yeah. They may be really pretty when they come in, but 4 or 5 months later, they may not look so good. But in the U.S., there's a lot of that kind of stuff that we're not allowed, or you're not allowed to do. So that's kind of, I guess it's an edge that they have in some ways that they have in fully tropical regions too, like Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, where a lot of these fish are coming from these days. They come in, they don't have to pay as much for land, labor, or heat because it's warm year round. So maybe they get even an extra spawn out of that, possibly. Yep. And then they do have to pay for shipping, but on the food and on the medication front, a lot of those countries are pretty much, you know, the Wild West as far as what you want to do to a fish. So, I mean, what else, I guess, what else would you say are like unfortunate side effects when you're buying something that's from outside the country that you might want to look for, at least know about ethically and health-wise?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is probably hormoning fish, right?
Okay.
So that's probably the biggest advantage, the biggest disadvantage I think Florida farms have. And we can make case for good or bad for them, but if you're buying more of a hormone, and it's easy to talk about African cichlids, especially peacocks, because that's the easiest one you can see it in, right? So essentially what they're doing is they're giving fish, they're enhancing their color by giving them a hormone to enhance their color, and it even turns females and gives them more male characteristics, which gives them their color as well. However, in a lot of the peacocks, the color doesn't hold up. So you might get a bright red dragon, and strawberry peacocks are probably the easiest one to see because that fish is hormone in, right? You're not getting very many natural bred that color. Most of those fish are bred out of Thailand, and you get it. It's beautiful, and it's like, let's say 2.5 to 3 inches, and you paid $20 for it, maybe $25 for it. It's good fish. And then in 30 days, that color's gone. It's faded to nothing,
Yeah.
and you're like, is it my fish stressed? Well, probably not. It's just it's almost like you got duped, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, they call it juice, just like
juiced. Yeah.
Just like you'd have a weightlifting competition if you're on steroids, and then all of a sudden your dealer cuts off the supply. I mean, if the fish doesn't die from fatty liver disease and these other health problems that steroids can cause, then you've also got it drops off as soon as they stop having their dose or whatnot. So, and I mean, that can also lead to things like infertility and other chromosome I just crossed 2 words, chromosome damage issues, things like that in the long run when they treat them with things like that, because they're just interested in that fish selling, and it's probably not traceable. Whereas if hey, Dan's farm sold me this fish, you're not going to do business with Dan again. Whereas if you have to try to think, oh, Thailand fish, one was bad, I mean, you're probably going to come back and keep trying it a few times until maybe you see like, oh man, these fish do terrible every time, and people in the industry like you may know that, but a hobbyist or consumer is not going to have any idea where to start with that. So, I mean, are there limits to what fish are being bred in the U.S. versus other places because of labor, size, time, anything like that, or like?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that takes a lot of time to cull is no longer being bred here in Florida. So the biggest one being guppies. Nobody does fancy guppies. There's not but 1 to 2 farms that do fancy guppies. That's the culling, because they're trying to keep the line so nice, and to compete with the places they're coming from is so cheap. It's a non-competitive product to take that much time into it. The farmers just don't have that sort of labor to even getting labor to do this kind of work is very hard to even find, let alone manage it at scale like they're doing in other countries. Like, for example, the guppies. Most of your guppies I see now probably all come out of Sri Lanka. They're one of the largest producers of fancy guppies. If
you're interested in seeing inside behind that world, on Instagram, there's a channel called Guppy Permilla in Sri Lanka, and it's guys who own a farm, and it's a pretty average farm, really. I mean, they've got some glossy spreadsheets of what they offer, and it's amazing. It's really pretty. It's stuff you don't see in the US very often. But they also have reels and stuff of them, drinking beer, smoking cigarettes, sitting around the concrete vaults and just like hanging out. So it's kind of this weird, like, you see them like on a moped, and they've got like 1,000 bags of like guppies, like all tied together in a chain, rather than,
oh my God,
like they can't like, just for economy, they can't afford individual bags. So they've taken a big long plastic tube bag and they just twist it, and they put different, like if they're just taking it down the road to the distributor or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of a surreal, another YouTube channel called Dexter's World. If you go back and watch his early videos, he's a fish breeder and seller from the Philippines who started out in kind of I won't want to say ghetto, but it is kind of a favela or lower end, maybe neighborhood, not quite a slum or anything, but he sells fish to those people, like, and down there that's even more common in the US, because your average person, they could put it in a bowl in their house and they could have certain like labyrinth fish and things thrive and do okay in a few gallon space. Whereas in the US, it gets cold and bugs aren't plentiful everywhere in the US to just fly into your pond or tank. So there are some differences from living right where your fish are from and bringing them in. But I mean, that's another critique that we hear sometimes of the fish industry, the ornamental fish industry, though, is what happens when these fish get out. I mean, that's another kind of dark side of the Florida industry is, you guys have a really cool ecosystem that's really unique, alligators and manatees and all sorts of special stuff. And if you go to Florida now, I mean, I've seen it in Crystal River, if you go up to, or Crystal Springs, Crystal River, whatever you want to call it. Ginny Springs. There's a bunch of spots where now you'll see like plecos with the bow fins, like hundreds of them. So did that come from hobbyists? Did that come from farms flooding during hurricanes? I mean, what's responsible for that? Like, let's kind of unpack that little unfortunate tidbit that's occurred. But I mean, it's happening in Texas, so that kind of tells me, or the fact that this summer I caught sumo or weather loaches up here in Seattle in our lake, that 30 miles long, and it freezes around the edges in the winter. Yet there are dojo or weather loaches spawning in the lake. I mean, I caught dozens of babies. So obviously that's people putting them in there. But what's the case with Florida? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't think it's the same thing for every case. And let's talk about a few. The plecos, I think, originally came in from hobbyists. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't heard of a whole lot of farms flooding where that was the biggest cause of issues, because a lot of the times the flooding ends up going into, depending on how they're taken care of and how they're managed, might have a lot to do with them. A lot of people might have like what we call a dumping pond, where like the pond's bigger than like 20 or 30 ponds, and they're pumping fish and water into that one pond if they need to get them out or something, where it's not going into some sort of like, body of water that's going to get out off the property. There's got to be some sort of BMP in place to keep all fish on site, essentially. For most of that. Now, back in the day, I'm sure back in the 60s, 70s, that was still being developed. That was still trying to figure out what to do. But man, there's a lot of species down here now. How they all got out? Peacock bass. My God, Mayan cichlids. We got clown knives in the waterways.
I've seen that. I mean, I myself happened to find quite a few cichlids while I was down there.
Yeah.
Like I saw some. I did see peacock bass, but I saw someone else catch a clown knife. The one that surprised me, just because I was like, well, wow, that's a big fish, was a pacu. Outside of Tampa, a guy had caught a pacu. And it was in like, if people aren't, I mean, a lot of people around the world may not know what Florida looks like, but it has a lot of, so the whole state, the southern third or half, is kind of inundated with water and waterways. And even central Florida kind of is like that around Orlando and then into Ocala. There's some high spots and rolling hills, but there's also this aquifer that's connected to everything. And there's streams and creeks that run out to the ocean. And there's all these complexes. Florida was very wild until the 1920s and 30s, and except for a few cities on the coast. And so they developed, land was cheap, and they developed a lot of big complexes. So you'll find housing complexes of, 500, 1,000, 5,000, even 10,000. Like the Villages is a retirement / elderly community with like 50, 60,000 people. And they're all living on like moats and like access canals and stuff to their like kind of development that was built around leisure activities, golfing, boating. So it's very easy for someone to have like a pond in Florida in their neighborhood, and then it gets into the pond next door, or it's connected via canal, and it spreads. So that's not a commonality for a lot of the world, but in Florida, water kind of rules everything, so. Yeah, I just wanted to like kind of fill folks in case they didn't know that side of Florida. So
yeah, and there's been a few fish. I don't know which ones. Some have been released by Fish and Wildlife back in the day. I want to say the porthole cichlid was one of them, but I'm not 100% on that one. But we do have now some cool stuff out there for risk assessment, risk management. So down at the research lab at UF down there's a professor there, Dr. Jeff Hill. He developed a risk assessment model for basically determining if a certain species is going to take hold and really become invasive on different things. And I know that that's been pretty. I know it was done in the glowfish trials when they originally started with glowfish.
Yeah.
And that's a risk assessment piece when they were developing, so that had to be taken care of. I don't know how many species he models a year, but when I was there, he did. I don't know the reports on him because I forgot now. It's been so long, but he was doing like Asian swamp eels,
Oh yeah.
snakehead, obviously down in the
Walk,
Everglades, places like that. He was doing all sorts of cool species like that.
walking cats, I know, was
Walking
another one he
cats.
did.
Yep.
Yeah, northern snakeheads. I talked to him. I got a bit of an interview with him about, man, it was almost 4 years ago now, probably. And he said he was new to the PR end of it, to talking to anybody. And so they had him talking to me, and I guess I was the first person he spoke with in that capacity. But that little snippet is actually on my channel too.
Nice.
But yeah, it kind of ties in nicely with it's not well filmed, not good audio. Sorry guys, but the podcast or the live stream, the channel's come a long way since I started it. But yeah, there's info from that guy and about the aquaculture research lab, which is, or center, which is a really neat place with good resources for people if you're interested in more of this stuff than what we are touching on here. But obviously, the best way to get more of it is going to be to follow Dan's podcast, Aquarium Insider, because he's kind of touching on a lot of this stuff. So, all right, so we've talked about the invasive species, the process of getting fish to the U.S. or growing them in the U.S. So what economically speaking, how much cheaper can people do that in another country once you add shipping compared to what you can do? Like as a consumer, how can we advocate for you is kind of what I'm getting at. About the, like reason out the cost or why things cost what they do a little bit. Like if you give us an example.
Yeah, I think two factors really play. Obviously, the biggest way in production is number one, obviously labor. This is a very labor intensive business. So just like with other industries, if it's very labor intensive, the country with the cheaper labor is going to win out. Mm-hmm. So how do you compete with that? And right now it's technology and getting research into getting better management and better producing practices is the best way to be more competitive, essentially. On that side, you see, like in Florida, I don't know if you know this or not, we have a $500 million salmon company that is doing it above ground. They have $500 million of investment. They're growing salmon, and they say and project they're going to have enough salmon to cover the entire U.S. market by 2030.
Wow.
They found a way to produce a fish using technology. They're using a lot of geothermal, saltwater wells, geothermal pumps, things like that are so far underground that they can keep the water at the same temperature year round. Okay. And now they brought something that was, because seafood's mostly imported. So that's one example of like you need technology to kind of advance that space.
Yeah,
for sure.
And there are other things, like I live in Washington and we have farm salmon and we have every wild salmon other than Atlantic salmon species. We got all 5, but the pens broke up north of Seattle about 2 or 3 years ago now. And I think it was 500,000 or so fish were possibly going to get out into the water. They don't know how many got out. It was like, I don't know, 20, 30,000, I think is a reasonable guess. Yeah. But things like that can happen. So it does seem like the regulation, as much as I know a lot of people complain about regulation, it's also very necessary for certain aspects of things. And so in the US, that's another thing we should mention is there's regulation. You have to do things to a standard or to a permit or to avoid your farm causing problems or leaching chemicals or fish or whatever it may be into the community at large. Whereas if you buy something from a small or a developing nation, let's just say that, they very well may not have anything that they have to do in that respect. It might just be Wild West open to whatever they want to do. So
yeah, we get checked twice a year from our Department of Ag for fish. We go over BMPs, the whole process. They twice a year they walk through our entire operations. What are you producing? How are you producing it? where the fish going? Where's your discharge sites at? Everything. And then plants are actually separate of that. We have a different division that takes care and regulates all of our plants and plant production, which isn't a ton. We don't do a ton of plants at all. We just have some that were in our ponds, and we grow those plants. Like we do hornwort, red Wigia, bacopa, moneywort, stuff like that. And that's just what we have the ponds. It's just there. It's an extra little side thing to add to the business. So, but yeah, and the hard part, I think, it's hard for Florida. The differentiation in Florida and imports used to be size and the quality of the fish.
Okay.
And when hormoning and different things kind of took over, it became less and less about that. And price, and with the price with the price on ornamental fish going, I don't think it's gone up very high over the last 20, 30 years, if you include inflation in that. It hasn't gone up very high. So the farmers are still making less and less, but you can't hardly differentiate the product now. It's not the same product. To give you an idea, swordtails 20 years ago, if you were to get a Florida swordtail, it's going to be 2.5 inches long.
Oh yeah.
It's a big swordtail.
At least, yeah.
And now, because no one does swordtails, that's a whole nother species that very few people raise swordtails. They're all going to be 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches if they're good, maybe, especially on the males, maybe. But, yeah, I think, as far as advocating for more Florida farms, I think if we had some way to put some more transparency portions in there to where, hey, these are Florida raised fish, because that would probably be the most helpful thing, because it's not like we're doing, I think, if you collected all the farms in Florida, we're probably doing somewhere between 500 and maybe 700 species of fish right now. That I'm trying to think on top of my, yeah, probably 500, maybe up to 1,000 if you include some of the smaller farms that focus on maybe 5 to 10 varieties of fish, maybe up to 1,000. Advocating for Florida, I think, requires a little bit more transparency on where your fish come from, and I think that does matter. And as far as one being more healthy than the other, I think that's such a hard, for me, I was thinking about that today. I was like, well, how do you differentiate the health in the two different fish? That's a hard thing to differentiate between, because depending on how many hands that fish has gone through, or the parameters it was at point A to point B to point C, it all changes so much depending on where they're going in the country.
And that's where you really need an honest retailer at the end of the day, and I'm going to do another little shameless plug here, but that's why I work with Aquatic Arts, is because they'll straight up tell me, like, we have an order of these and they came in really bad and we're not going to offer them. We might do a call them B grade and say they're on clearance, but we're never ordering those again. And, they're open about that. Whereas in the past, other people, they'll send you some anemic little bent spine, whatever. And you're like, okay. But I mean, that's to me why it's important to really get to know who you're buying your fish from, and hope that they really know where they're buying their fish from, and not just getting it from some trans shipper that doesn't have any transparency either. And if people don't know listening, it's very common to have people who kind of bring in a few species, or a whole lot of species, I should say, on a list and offer them in theory, and then people pick it and they wait a month or a couple weeks, and all of a sudden those come, but they're actually going through a third party that has talked to all 30 people in a bunch of different countries, and they know these people and where they're coming from. But once they get to them, they could be from anywhere basically, and they've just kind of gathered them. So there's not a consistency to every time you're going to get an angelfish. It's going to be silver dollar sized and non-GMO, fed well, no hormones. It might be wild, it might be that, it might be wherever, and that's still more common than you would think for little shops and pet stores to buy from kind of those, out of LA or out of New York outfits that do that. So it is nice when people buy from the places where you can track it down. So somebody also mentioned I just wanted to touch on it, but somebody in the chat mentioned that are you familiar with Colorado's PACFA laws for fish? They said that they need a license to sell a single fish to a store now, legally speaking.
I have not heard that yet. I did
Yeah.
not know that. That's interesting.
That's
So
true
like
with wild fish here. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I could see. Yeah. So I could see the difference. So down here, wild fish, native fish, all that's differently regulated. That's like a Fish and Wildlife Service thing versus a cultured product. And
Okay.
we spent years trying to get that definition clarified because
Yeah.
that's a whole nother problem that we're still dealing with. At the state level for a farmed product versus a wild product. That's a whole nother.
Well, right, like Elasoma, like pygmy sunfish, those come from Florida, wild. I mean, there's mollies and things that come from Florida wild also.
Sailfin, green sailfins.
right, or least killifish or blue sailfins. So yeah, you guys have some really cool native species too. Sorry, I'll let you continue. I just wanted to point that out for people who didn't know that.
Oh no, I was going to mention one point. I think you mentioned about Aquatic Arts telling you about that. I think that's the way we have to go in the hobby. That's such like to me. If you're not going to put out the extra effort to make sure you put out a good product, that to me is what get returning customers. It's when you sell a bad fish or you don't know or it's not treated properly. I'm not saying things don't happen. Things will happen. There's no way to avoid them. But if you're honest and open and say this is the issues, right? We can keep more people in the hobby versus. We're not going to tell them, oh, we'll just give them credit for a new fish. Well, how many new fish do they buy before they go and decide not to go do this anymore? And I think that to me has been the biggest downside of the entire hobby to me.
Yeah.
And having people that are doing it the right way is makes me optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the more information when people like you come and talk to us about it and give us that transparency from every step of the process, that's the only way we're going to know and the way people are going to get informed. Because I mean, I've almost basically, the only reason I go to the big box stores other than like food and dry goods, like aquarium sales and things, is to basically see if they screwed up and put some rare species bycatch in with the Danios or something, that's pretty much it, honestly. And so I think there's a model for shopping online smaller and shopping local fish stores or breeders. But historically, you guys a lot of times had to sign, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been told by at least a couple farmers that said they had exclusivity deals where like Seagrass or some larger company, 5D Imperial, whoever it may be at the time, but someone would say, hey, in 6 months, we're going to want 50,000 Pleco Ancestris or whatever. And you grow those for us. We'll give you a little bit of money now, a little bit when you bring the rest in or whatever, or we'll give you a better price when you bring them in. But you're not going to sell to anyone else in the area. And in some cases, I heard that it used to even result in like culling, like, oh, they didn't need all of those, but no, we're not allowed to sell them to anybody else. So what are we supposed to do? Does that thing still kind of go on, or?
I would say not many places are going to do that anymore. But yeah, that definitely was a big deal. A lot of the big farms competing for the product and putting those exclusive, contracts on ag products has been around for forever. They still do that in every single industry in ag. But yeah, definitely still, I don't think they do it as much here anymore because there's truthfully the ones that are big enough that can produce that kind of quantity are already doing it.
Okay.
And I don't think a lot of them have that. They might have contracts for other fish. I'm trying to think of a fish that might be contracted like that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would be that heavily contracted because there's that much demand for it.
Like tetra, there's no neon tetras or cardinal tetras or anything like that.
Maybe neons, maybe neon tetras, maybe rainbows, maybe a few fish like that. But outside of a few species, the big ones are already doing it anyway. They might just already have like not like so much a formal agreement, but like, hey, will you sell us those fish? This is what we're producing. This is what we want to see. And they're going to work together with those bigger box people, the bigger retailers, and say, hey, we need new fish coming this year. What do you want to produce? These were our sales last year. And they're going to make decisions on producing, typically 3 months before the year ends, 4 months before the year ends, and they'll start making preparations for the next year on like, what's the next fish we need to get to? Is it the same? How's pretty, and they'll make those gauges that way, I'm sure. So how far out do you, and what makes you decide,
You know, because people always come to me and they say, "Hey, like, how do I get my local pet store to carry this or that, or why don't they breed at least killifish in the hobby anywhere?" You know, so
Yeah.
what as you as a farmer, what do you look for when you're trying to decide what you're going to breed in the coming year, and then how far out do you have to plan for that?
What really made our decision very easy is we went real heavy into angels, and that's because nobody's breeding angels. Like,
That's crazy.
which
It
is
used to
crazy
be.
to think about. There's only like maybe 2 people producing angels at all, and we were selling quite a lot through our own distributor, our own company for wholesale.
Uh-huh.
And we're like, we want to do more angels, so we started working on doing angels again, and we do angels, and there's a market for severums. We do those. We do the Burundi frontosas. We do those.
Okay.
Albino bushy nose, chocolate bushy nose are some big species we're working on and still doing those. And those are just some of our best sellers ourselves, because we don't sell to big distributors. We just sell to our own company and
Mhm.
our customers and our little retail store, and that's it. We don't.
So look, I just wanted to unpack this for people so they see the value in this too. So, one, I mean, it costs more to live in the United States than it does in a developing nation. Two, it's regulated. So, there are things that are not going to happen with what your fish eats, what your fish gets treated with medically or shipped with. And then also, I mean, if it's wild caught, there's definitely arguments to be made for supporting wild caught, sustainably wild caught
Mhm.
thing. But at the same time, like when you buy something from another country, there may be 2 or 3 middlemen involved from their farm system to get out of their country to get into our country,
Right.
that add to the stress on the fish or the
Yep.
chemicals in that fish or whatever may be going on. And so when you actually can meet the farm, see the farm, I mean, and that's another thing about aquatic arts is they tell me all the time, tell people when you're promoting us that if they know the breeder, like the farm or somebody even in wherever, some in Kansas that are they do some pleco or something. If you can get to the source, do it. I mean, support those people.
Yep.
And the honest fact is that there will never be enough people breeding all the different things that people want
Yep.
that are in contact with one another. So there'll always be a role for different, wholesalers, retailers, and farmers. But those farmers, you guys have gotten squeezed out between recession and cost of land. And I mean, even just like the cost of accessing water, food, chemicals, things like cost of living is going up. I see that Celestial Pearl Danios used to be $3 to $6, the last few years, and they're up to the $10 mark in Seattle now. Retail.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't see them anymore except for Indonesia. I don't see them anywhere on anybody's list, anywhere I've gone, any other country. I only see them in Indonesia.
So
right now.
Taiwan has a few lists that I've seen. Petra out of Europe has a few. But that being said, they're having a huge issue with they collected a very small group size. I was talking to a farmer overseas. I can't say where, but he was saying that they actually collected, maybe 1,000 from the wild, and one farm in Singapore in around 2007 or 8 came out with some really nice looking fish, but they were all based from that core group, and they were from one collection site
Yeah.
in Myanmar and off of Lake Inle, and that same line actually went through all the Southeast Asian farms, basically bought from that one source because they didn't want to pay for an expedition into the Shan region of where Lake Inle is to legally get the fish out of there. I mean, one, it was controlled by gun-toting dictators, and then there's also the Golden Triangle of drug lords and warlords that control that specific region within the region. And then you've also got state separatists and Chinese Maoist guerrillas, all with guns that live in that region. Only since 06, I mean, did they even discover the Celestial Pearl Danio.
Yeah.
But it's made it so that yeah, tourists still go there, and there's been these windows since '06, since the military junta got kind of fell apart, but now they've risen back up the last 2 years, and I mean, tanks were rolling down the street in the main city, and so it's kind of closed it off again. Or I mean, you very much so risk getting kidnapped if you go there. And there are Westerners that do dare to go places like that. But some of the fish come from Papua New Guinea or parts of Indonesia where there's Islamic separatists that are active. I mean, so there's places where you can only get stock from once in a blue moon when someone goes and collects, and catalogs those things. But CPDs happen to be one that they're having a lot of spine issues with the humpback and spine deformation now because of how limited that was. And they actually culled a lot of them. And then they were told, oh, we'll go and we'll collect, we'll go in together and we'll buy in Southeast Asia, a few different big farms. We're going to go buy some new ones from the wild and via Thailand's market. And then that whole, I mean, the world pandemic and the military revolt, I guess, in Myanmar happened. So that also affected trade pathways of pea puffers and tinwinny danios or gold ring danios. So there's certain fish that you might notice are just not around for a few year periods. Yep. And world crises and economics definitely play a role in that. And so, I mean, it's nice to know that at least in the U.S. there's not going to be hopefully any tanks rolling into Florida and taking over the fish farm, or for that matter, conflict fish that are raised by warlords or something, so that's another plus to things, I guess.
Yeah.
No tariffs are going to some, guerrilla movement.
Nope. No tariffs here except for on imports of goldfish and koi. That's the only tariffs at the moment.
Okay. Interesting. And I've been reading that Israel's getting really into the goldfish game too, and koi game. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of interesting. There's a desert where traditionally, they've done finance, they've done diamonds, and they add value to very small items that they can add a lot of value to and then pass it on, kind of middleman, because they just don't have that many resources and that much land. Yeah. So it's smart. You see that with the UK, you see that with Japan and island nations, Taiwan, where they take something and they make it very, very high end, or they do a very good job with it. So I'm really curious to see how their koi and goldfish industry shape up. They said the biggest farm in the world now is going to be out of Israel this coming year.
That's insane.
Number wise for like koi. So
yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, so let's. What other things, I guess, would you? Let's kind of wrap this up on your end of. I mean, thank you so much for speaking with us, and then we'll open it up Absolutely. For questions from folks watching. But what other things, if you go to the store and you buy a fish, and you're looking for a fish, what ways, I mean, how can we find out what's from Florida, or how can we buy from you if it doesn't involve going to the store? I mean, where are you available? How can we support other domestic sources if that's what we want to do? I mean, and I'm going to say this with the disclosure of, or I guess I'll just say that, there's some fish you want to buy wild. There's some fish you want to buy from foreign sources because they do a really good job with X, Y, or Z. Yep. And then there's other ones that are your bread and butter fish, and you're not causing anyone to starve, or, you're not cutting anyone whose life depends on it out of the business by getting your guppies or your rainbow fish from a farm here versus somewhere else. And you can feel good about it. So, I mean, what are some fish that are pretty common out of Florida right now and that you would say we should get? And then also, where can people go to find your stuff, or, your people stuff from Florida?
Yeah, I think as far as finding different fish out of Florida, some big ones I'm thinking that are produced right now, it's honestly a lot of what I call a lot of the bread and butter stuff. Black neons probably mostly come out of Florida. I mean, there's still some import. There's still some lag in supply chain in some fish, but generally speaking, a lot of your black neons, brilliant rasboras, A lot of your X-ray tetras
Mhm.
come out of here. A lot of your
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, X-ray tetras are still bred here. They actually have one. We actually just brought one in. It's a I think it's a mix of a gold Pristella, and I think I don't know exactly which one it is. I got to ask, but it's a gold blushing X-ray.
I've seen a picture of those from Aquarium Blazer. Those are pretty.
Yeah. We just got those in. It's the first time I've seen it. Dwarf orange Mexican crawfish come out of Florida.
CPOs.
Yeah, those come out of here. Those type fish that are going to be coming from overseas a lot of the times, I can tell you right now, is going to be any paired guppy for the most part, probably coming out of Singapore. And they're nice. I'm not saying they're bad. There are some fish that are just better overseas that are just there. Like, Galaxy Rasboras, you're not going to find them produced anywhere in Florida. That's just they're not producing enough young for people to put them at scale. But that's a beautiful fish. I will say we've gotten several shipments out of Colombia. In wild rams, I thought would do terrible in hard water. And my God, that fish is amazing. It doesn't
wow.
It is one of the hardiest rams I think we've ever had.
Well, that shows you what line breeding can do to a fish too, because there's a reason people think that. I mean, when you go and buy a farm-raised, line-bred, inbred ram or balloon ram or something where all its organs are compressed and I mean, it may look cute to you or whatever. I rescued. I didn't buy them. They had a bag of 25. I went to PetSmart and they had a bag of 25 that were all dead. I mean, they were going to put the bag in the trash. And I said, "Hey guys, let's make sure they're all dead. Can I take a look at that?" And the guy was like, "Yeah, call my manager." But I took 3 fish home alive that were alive and just in bad shape out of the bag, and 2 of them survived, and they're a pair, and they're in the tank right behind me. Their bodies they're balloon rams, and their body is really contorted. It's kind of like pugs, and I don't mean to throw shade on anybody who loves their pugs, but if you look at a Great Dane or a wolf or some regal German Shepherd or something, there is a look that a dog has in the wild that is not compressed face so that it has sleep apnea. I'm not throwing shade on the dog; they're great dogs, but or the fish for that matter. But there are downsides to line breeding like that for sure. So that is something to keep in. That is something to keep in mind. I don't promote, I wouldn't breed my balloon cichlids ever. I just felt bad that they were dying,
Yeah, I'm not a fan of balloons myself.
Balloon anything, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we could go into a whole episode, and maybe in the future you want to talk more, but I mean, yeah. So in any case, we were going to talk also. So you mentioned some of the species we can see. Where do you advise people to go to buy stuff from Florida? I'm having Anthony Mazeral of the Ornamental or the Amazon Ornamental Fish Research Center on next week. He'll be on,
awesome.
which I'm pretty excited about. I'll post info in the community tab, but that's kind of going to be a flip side of. He's trying to get the people down there to sustainably learn how to do aquaculture of what works best for them right there in the jungle.
Yeah.
And so what can we do to counter that? We can buy our jungle fish. We can buy our Taiwanese orandas or whatever. We can buy a shrimp. Yeah, for that matter, Taiwan. Shrimp. Taiwan, hands down, is the place to get quality shrimp. But hey, what's up, Anthony? See him in the chat. He said, "Hey, that's me, the Amazon Research Center for Ornamental Fishes." But in any case, so what are some good sites? I put your site in the link below, so people can shop there. But what other places do you recommend for finding that support the farmer the most? I guess is how I should say it.
Yeah, Imperial Tropicals. Mike Jotty over there at Imperial is a really good dude. He's been around as long as we have. He's been here as long as we have. He's a good guy. Expanded out a lot. I think he's doing pretty good. I look at his website every now and then. He's got some pretty cool stuff. But he raises quite a few species, gets a few species here and there. But I think he's a good. I don't know I'm trying to think of other ones. that I personally know very well that sell direct. I don't know a lot of people that sell direct to the consumer on that level.
Right.
Bio
I was just
Aquatic.
gonna say, on
Sorry, I
on
forgot about
Andre.
him. Yeah,
Yeah,
Andre's down there. Bio
yeah.
Aquatic's good guy. He's good. Oh shoot.
That's and I happen to have spoken with those people, but those are
Yeah.
the people I know too. So maybe it's just you guys are the ones that are accessible. Then that's great then that you are. I mean, have you
There's
guys
more
thought?
down here, I'm sure, but I just haven't
Yeah,
bought from anybody else or
yeah.
dealt with them much.
Have you guys thought about reforming the collective like your dad's generation kind of did, or does that not make sense anymore? Or
I don't think it makes a ton of sense to economically do it, because the way it works is the farms have everyone has their own species already, and I think everyone's found a better way to just make it more economically viable. Like it's a lot more tight knit. There's not as many farmers obviously used to be, so everyone has their own species. No one's really stepping on each other's toes. There's none of that competition for the same fish. I mean, you might have some overlap because there's so much demand, but generally speaking, you don't have a lot of people just, oh, I'm gonna raise 5 of the same species you have. I'm gonna out compete you for price. There's not there anymore.
okay,
So I don't think it's as necessary as it used to be. But
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, thank you so much, Dan. I mean, it's been a great talk. I feel like we covered quite a bit of ground. Sorry if I kind of interject with the delay, and also I get excited and I'm like, ooh, this is what I was telling you guys about. Now we have the guy and he's here and we can talk.
No, man, do it anytime. That's good. Did you want to do a Q&A?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to see if anybody has questions for the Aquarium Insider, the Dark Lord himself. Well, there's nothing dark about him, but he knows he knows the history. He knows the secrets. He knows where the bodies are buried.
They're in the bottom of fish ponds.
Yeah, exactly. More people saying they can vouch for Imperial Tropicals. Ray Aquatic says Summerland Farms is another one. I don't know that one. Cass. Cass, I gave you a wrench because I know you will take it seriously and probably too much so. So just relax. I expect nothing of you. You just mentioned that you couldn't be a mod, so I wanted to get that to you. But hey, guys, is there any? I know there's a delay for us, but what questions do you guys have for Dan here while we've got him? Someone says, "Hey, Dan, where are you located in Florida? Where are all the fish farms located?"
Yeah, we're located in a little town called Riverview. We're about 20 miles south of Tampa.
Okay.
And we got our 7.5, 10-acre farm right there.
Out by Bradenton, kind of?
About 20 minutes north of Bradenton.
Okay, like Ruskin?
Yeah, a little north of Ruskin, about 10 minutes north of Ruskin. Yep.
I'm getting closer.
You were real close. I was like, yep, right there in that area.
Okay. All right, very cool. And then, how do you deal with ponds? Anthony Mazerall from the Ornamental, the Amazon. Hold on, let me get it right. Amazon Research Center for Ornamental Fish. He says, hey, how do you deal with ponds and disease outbreaks, like when that happens in a big pond where you do have one of your more common fish?
Well, to be honest, we haven't had a whole lot of disease outbreaks in our ponds, and it's because we're not running our ponds at full production capacity. So our ponds are probably never more than 50% at capacity. This is probably 10 years ago now, around our farm, we literally live in the middle of a subdivision. We have a 7-acre fish farm in the middle of like 4 developments.
That's just grown up around you kind of thing?
Yeah. They just kind of bought all the farms around us and everything else. And what happened is they built these humongous like retention ponds that shifted our water table. And we had to go back and redig our entire farm probably about 15 years ago. So our ponds went from being maybe 8 feet deep, and then with no water, they were drying up to about 2 foot of water. We redug those ponds almost 30 feet deep. So our ponds now, the water table seems to be a little bit more leveled out now. I guess it just came back over the years. Our ponds are like 25 feet deep, and we don't stock them super full. So we're not having, we've never, knock on wood, not having huge disease outbreaks. The main thing we deal with is predation. Birds, turtles, frogs, snakes, otters, alligators the other day, because there's eminent domain ditch that runs through our property that comes all the way from like another little creek down the road, and they brought in gators.
Great.
So
Wow.
not a whole lot of disease issues. The only thing we
Maybe.
dealt with in that side of things was a viral disease when I was a kid.
Mhm.
We lost every angel on our farm from an airborne virus in about 2 weeks.
Wow. Wow. I mean, so when you have, I guess when you have a big pond, do you even see like ick or something like that like happening, or it's just like when they have that kind of wild? And I mean, your ponds have mosquito larvae, so they're eating
Mhm.
good food plus the food you feed them. They have the water changes way beyond what an aquarium would be, and so I think that's important to tell people. I mean, yes, wild fish get sick, duh,
Yeah.
but if you've treated them for a lot of parasites, treat them when they leave the farm.
Yeah.
I've heard that from a lot of farmers that, I mean, maybe it's out of sight, out of mind a little bit in that it's a big pond. How are you going to see if it has an issue?
Yeah.
But when you pull them in, you would know if they were full of issues.
You would know.
And yeah. And so, I mean, that's really cool to hear that when you raise them, I mean, in a I mean, it looks like a pond. It doesn't look like a pool. It looks more like a pond down there, most of them, outside ones. And all the little microflora and fauna they eat, and the gut biome that they have, that those muddy ponds with cattails or whatever in them, I think they make a big difference personally from hearing about it. So
yeah,
it probably
100%.
helps the health a lot. So someone says, Fish Dream says, any plans on breeding any fancy bristlenose plecos or any new varieties?
No, not at the moment. Right now, we're just trying to get our albino bushy nose now to scale. So we're trying to get our goal is always to at least have one fish that can produce 5,000. I'm sorry, not 10,000 a month. So that's typically our goal for most species. So
Okay.
we're trying to really get to the level to get to 10,000 a month. And we don't typically cast a wide net. We typically focus on a few species and getting it up as fast as we can. So
That makes sense.
right now,
Yeah.
we do have a couple pet albino gibbosette plecos that are like 14 years old. Our breeder brought from Miami. Those things are so cool. They're like, I don't know, 2 foot long albino gibboseps.
Wow.
They're so cool.
That is super cool. Terry's Tropical Tank says, I remember the angelfish virus wiped me out in the 80s too. Yeah, that's crazy. Let's see here. Oh, Mary Page, hello. And she says, everybody remember to give a thumbs up if you're in here. Yeah, that does help the feed, and it helps the info travel. Same with it's only $1.99 a month. If you guys do want to become members, it keeps what I'm doing possible, lets me do more of this, interview more people, get more people on here. I hope to pay them in the future. I mean, it'd be great if I could cut Dan a check, but since I can't do that, I put a link to his info, his podcast, and his farm where you can buy his fish, or his business rather, down below. So maybe somebody can repost that link. Somebody requested to see a link to your retail site.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and then Kelly Huff, thank you so much for the $5 super chat. First one of the night. Appreciate it greatly. It means a lot. Let's see here. What other ones do we have? Any thoughts on old world exotics? I believe Leif now sells to the public.
Yep.
Alice.
Yeah. I personally never dealt with Leif as much. I know my dad and him did a lot of business way back in the day, but he's been around as longer than my family's been in the business. So you're not around that long in this business if you're not doing something right. I can tell you that right now. This is not the easiest business to be in. Anytime you're doing a live product, it's difficult. So that long as he's been around, it's a good thing.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's cool. Oh yeah. So then Mick also asked, hey, are hurricanes an issue? So Tampa generally doesn't get hit as hard historically because it kind of has to hook around and then slam into the coast, whereas hurricanes lose steam within a few miles of shore. The Everglades do kind of act differently, and with the world warmer and storms seemingly kind of bigger the last 5 years, that could change. But I mean, what's your take on hurricanes and threat to your livelihood there?
Yeah, definitely. Hurricane preparedness is actually a really big deal. Depending on, what you're doing in production, what do you have for backups? Because, the biggest thing for us is generators. Your power goes out, you don't have air pumps for your indoor stuff, everything's dead. It's out. You got 30 minutes.
Oh
You have
man.
typically, if the power goes out and we don't have a generator to kick in, we have 30 minutes to save our entire whatever space we have fish in. Right now, we've got basically three separate buildings of fish, and in a 30-minute window is all we have to make sure they don't die.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's so kind of a big deal for that. And then, the only lucky thing for us, our ponds are so deep, they never fill even close to the top. So we don't have the threat of flooding very much that's going to overfill them. Now, we did get close a few years ago where the tops kind of ran to the top, but it never flooded our farm. And that was the closest we've ever been. And it was, we got 6 foot of water in that pond. We try to pump some of the ponds down that are the lowest ahead of anything like that, and
Wow.
as best we can. So there's not a whole lot of, that's a very difficult. Yeah, it's difficult for sure. And the more structures you have, covers over the ponds with all the big metal, galvanized frames. When I was a kid, it hit our old farm when I was a kid. Before, Andrew
was that Andrew? Yeah.
Andrew twisted basically all those frames up and tore them in just like a pop top. Just boop, popped them off. Craziness. But hurricanes definitely affect and impact the business for sure.
Yeah. Hey, thanks again, Mary Page. Also for the merch, Mary Page just posted a link to my merchandise. There's new merch up there with the channel logo, and for tonight only till midnight, 15% off, but I already keep the prices like about a 10% profit over cost. So if you guys are interested in the merch from the channel, definitely grab some of that now. Thanks for posting that. And also thanks for posting, if you're in the chat right now, Mary also posted the link to the podcast that Dan has as well. So thank you, Mary. Also, okay, let's see here. We'll do a couple more questions, but we spoke on this. Mr. Gromby wants to know, what was the first fish you got into? So probably angelfish, then kind of what you said. And then what is the hardest one to keep, and which one is most sustainable, or like one of your best ones?
Yeah, angelfish was the first we ever got into. We did that one, was the first one we ever did at scale.
Okay.
And then when the angelfish disease hit us, that obviously made it the most difficult time. Because you're talking, you don't know what to do. And when your whole life, and basically at that point, 80% of our production was angelfish.
Jeez.
So we went from becoming farmers to wild collectors for a time period as we could ramp up production. So we went to collecting hog chokers or freshwater flounder for a while.
Oh man,
to get by. Now, mind you, I'm just a kid. I didn't know the ramifications of what was actually going on. I was just out there collecting cool things with a net. I'm finding like artifacts and stuff in the sand and the rivers and stuff. Like I'm finding all sorts of like shark's teeth. Like I'm just having fun. I didn't understand the gravity of the situation,
Right.
So that was difficult. As far as keeping sustainable, a lot of basically it all comes down to production. How many babies can these things throw at a certain time frame? How often they throw, and then how fast can I get it to something that's sellable and in good health? Typically 4 months is a good time frame to get most things to about the size I want to sell it, 1.5 to 2 inches for most fish.
Wow. And what do you feed your fry then too? Is that like baby brine shrimp? Golden pearls. Like what's your?
Almost everything's on live baby brine for the most part, and then we move from a baby brine to more of a commercialized meal that's made for fry. It's really high in protein. We feed them that 3 times a day. Our breeder might even feed them 4 times a day, depending on what time of year it is.
Is that like a fish meal based type thing? Like high, like 50% plus protein?
I believe it's 55.
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. I got to go check. But I'm pretty sure it's like 55.
I just did an episode on brine shrimp and how the ones in our hobby are pretty low grade compared to the kind you guys get. You get the ones that are harvested quickly, or the decapsulated baby brines, and they can have as much as, double, triple the protein and omega 3s and omega 6s as what you would see from the like quote unquote sea monkey grade
Yep.
brine shrimp. So do you buy your feed anywhere that people could emulate? Like, where do you get your brine shrimp, or is it a big commercial source?
Yeah, no, we buy. I think anybody can buy from here. The FT, it stands for the Florida Tropical Fish Farmers Association. They have a website called
Okay.
FTFFA Co-op, and they sell all the supplies typically we buy for stuff. Like all of our brine shrimp come from there. A lot of our nets will come there. Our meds, stuff like that, will all come from them. So they're good. They're basically the cooperative for the nonprofit that is the association.
Okay.
So
awesome. And one more time, what was that place called?
Florida Tropical Fish Farmers Association. So it's abbreviated online for FTFFA. They're good people.
Okay, awesome.
Good place. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks everyone for watching and for asking questions. Definitely follow through and check out Dan's ongoing podcast, anything he posts on his channel, or if you want to do some shopping for fish, check out his link as well. And that's about all I have to say, but I always like to give the last word to my guest. And thank you so much, mods. Thank you, watchers, lurkers, people in the replay, wherever you may be listening to or seeing this, and also super chatters and channel members. Thank you so much. You guys make this happen. The last word, though, what's it going to be, Dan?
It was just gonna be thanks, man. I just appreciate you coming on, talking about it, going through some different things, and I definitely appreciate the different mods. I put my links out there. I'm super appreciative of that. And if you guys have any questions, ask me on the channel, find our website, send me a question. We have chat features on our website. I typically just respond from my phone. So if you got questions, want to know anything, I'm an open book. I don't have any, the goal for this is transparency. So anything you want answered, shoot me a link.
All right, right on. Well, thank you so much. I just ruined you having the last word, but goodbye, everybody, and I'll let you say goodbye too.
Yeah, later, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.